Have you ever noticed whenever you select a language within a website, it always shows that there are two kinds of Chinese. One is simplified Chinese and the other one is traditional. Yeah, I know sometimes the tradition is separated into Hong Kong and Taiwan, but technically there is no big differences. And sometimes the Japanese character is so similar to the Chinese. Like this one, 学, it means learning. This Japan character is exactly the same as simplified Chinese. If you are curious about all this, welcome to my history series. And this is Skyros, an Eastern wizard who loves the classic. And today's topic is about Chinese cultural sphere. More precisely, the relationship within the Chinese and Japanese language. In order to understand this relationship, we need to date back to the origin Chinese character, start from the 1200s BC China. The earliest Chinese character can be traced back to the oracle bone of the Naishan dynasty. This script was simplified for the wall paintings, and the main feature of the Chinese character is the large number of strokes. This script could also express both meaning and syllable at the same time. Compared to the wall painting, it is very simplified, but it's still very complicated to understand. So in the first stage, it was only used by the priests and the nobles. Later, the Chinese characters spread all across the Asia. More and more people use it to express themselves. So it begins a long journey of evolution. During this evolution, one Chinese character with the same meaning can write in different forms. For example, this character, Guang, it means shut down. There are a whole bunch of variants with the exact same meaning, but with different writing styles. There are many reasons why this happened, but that's the story for another day. I won't talk about it. Back to the topic, there is also a time span problem. For the oracle bones to 2024, basically more than 3,000 years. Even if we take a step back and say the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty around 200 BC. People in that age already couldn't understand this Asian character system. So, in the 1st century AD, the scholar began to organize the Chinese character. Finally, they summed up the principle of the character. It is called 六书, 6th principle of the creating and usage for the Chinese character. Therefore, this classic study 小学 was born. This classic study focused on the explanation of the Chinese character. Among the Han Dynasty scholars, there was a man of the legend called Xu Sheng, who wrote a dictionary that had a profound impact on the classic study. It is called 说文解字. Xu Sheng compared various Asian characters. Finally, he picked one as the standardized character, the one he thinks it is the original character. The other one were categorized as variant characters. The traditional scholar after Han called these standardized character as 正体字 and the variant character as 异体字. Although it is not an official category, this is only for academic research, but this has become the basic classic study since 200 AD. So with the dictionary, do you think there will be no more variants? The answer is no. First of all, the government could not spread the standardized character across the China. It had neither the technical support nor the motivation. But the variant character didn't develop much in the Han Dynasty, because only the noble could read and write at that time, so character evolved in a very stable pace. This situation was changed completely after the Song Dynasty, around 916 AD. Why in this era flourished? Because in this era, the citizen society grew rapidly. More and more citizens mastered the Chinese character. The citizens' literature flourished. They began to simplify the writing in order to satisfy their own needs. Obviously, their simplified would not obey the classic study. So, these simplified Chinese characters used by the citizen society were also called vulgar characters. In Chinese, it was called 俗字. It is also one kind of variant. In this way, in traditional China, the Chinese characters were written in two systems. On the one hand, there were the standardized characters named 正体字. On the other hand, there were the variant characters used by the common folk in their daily lives, that is 异体字. In the Chinese classic study, there was no such a clear-cut distinction between standardized and the variants. Well, at least not as hard as the modern China. Then this character system basically continued for thousands of years until the Republic of China eras, around the 1910s AD. This system was completely broken. The Chinese written system has undergone a radical change because the science and modernity has come to the China. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Chinese character system underwent a major change in modernization. The modern state tries to unify the whole country's character system. Only standard character can exist, no more variants. The government wants to unify the pronunciation, the character, basically everything. The government wants a modern language. Why? Because the nation wants to promote national unity. On one hand, the nation built trains to smash all the geographical barriers. On the other hand, they unified language so as to break the cultural barrier. Industrialization also required the basic literacy, which means a completely unified character. After the Republic of China era, the government began to promote the modernized character, which completely broke the traditional system. Similarly, the unified movement began during the Meiji era in Japan, and the Japan language faced a more complicated situation than China, because there are three writing systems in Japanese: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Technically, kanji is one of the Chinese characters. Now there are a whole large number of characters that have the same meaning in each system. For example, A in hiragana can be written in 5 characters. And eventually, the Japan government chose one of them, A, to be the standardized character. And then the rest were treated as variant. All of these variants were abolished after the standardization. In the end, there were several hundred characters in the hiragana system, so the Meiji government simplified all the system from the several hundreds to the 48. Those 48 characters were the prototypes of the modern Japanese. Same unified movement goes to the katakana and kanji. Unlike China, Japan has not undergone a radical change both in society and politics, so the unified progress was smoothly. But in China, this unified language movement was very radical and painful. People believe that a unified country, a unified language is the key to the modern China. So it makes the language reform not only a cultural issue but also a political one. And that's the main controversial thing in China. Speaking of which, we have to mention the new cultural movement. This ideal wave in 1910s radically changed the way thinking about the modernity. At the beginning of the 20th century, radical scholars proposed reform or even abolition towards the Chinese characters. Since then, the Chinese community has been engaged in the decade-long debate about the Chinese characters. Thanks to this movement, the basic conflict has shifted from the standardized versus the variants to the traditional versus the simplified. The tension grows stronger and stronger in 1920s China. Due to the chaotic age in China, this language unify was never completed. Until the 1950s, the situation in China is finally settled down. However, even today, this debate has not been done. Why there was no such confrontation in ancient times? Because the cultural policy of the modern state could not tolerate such complicated script system. The Chinese language have to be written in only one way. At this time, the standardization of Chinese character can no longer be done in the old way, Back in the old days, only the principle of the Liu Shu was taken into consideration. In modern times, when the state institutions are regulating characters, they need to abolish all the variant characters. They have to consider whether the Chinese character is acceptable or not, on and on. Why there are simplified and traditional Chinese? Why Japanese kanji appears to be partly simplified and partly traditional? Because each government has its own cultural policy. The language reform is closely related to how people feel the modernity and the tradition. However, since they all learned the legacy of the tradition, even if there are different standardized characters in different places, we could still understand each other. Well, at least sometimes. After the World War II, each government in Asia went to a separate way, and the simplified and the traditional Chinese were finally settled down. In the Chinese cultural sphere, if we put the most radical one at the one side and the most conservative at the other side, it will look like this. The most radical one is, of course, the Korean and Vietnam. They both abolished the Chinese character. After the World War II, they have a discussion about restoring it, but the answer is nope. Nowadays, the Korean uses the Chinese character only in ID cards, and the Vietnam abolished it completely. And the next one is mainland China. It preserved the Chinese character but adopted a very radical strategy. The reason for simplifying was to reduce the number of strokes and to lower the cost for learning Chinese characters. Japan is somewhere in the middle. It simplified Chinese, but it didn't go too wild. I will talk about it later. And now comes the most traditional. The Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. These three mostly have inherited the traditional character. They have not adopted any radical strategies. Of course, they have changed a little bit in some characters, but still very conservative. Therefore, most of the Chinese characters in these places are interoperable, except for some special cases. However, as I said earlier, there are many reasons to be considered when standardizing the Chinese character. Simplify is only just one mean to it. And now here comes the Japan. Japan is quite interesting. Japan's cultural policy after World War II was very radical at the beginning. However, the policy deleted a lot of commonly used Chinese characters, so it arose a strong provoke among the public. So later in the 1981, the government began to shift to the more conservative cultural policy. In the end, Japan became a kind of compromise between the traditional one and the simplified one. For example, take the word guan. In Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, it is still the traditional character, but in mainland China, it took the variant guan as the standardized character, and then Japan is somewhere in the middle. It is like this one, a compound of both. In the traditional Japan, the prototype of katakana and hinakana were simplified in the Chinese script too. The Japan people use these characters as phonetic symbols. In fact, at the beginning of the 20th century, Zhang Taiyang and others make reference to the Japan's idea and propose the earliest Chinese phonetic scheme. So you can say that the standardized character idea is quite similar in East Asia. In order to not confuse you guys, let's do a summarize. In the traditional China, there are traditional character and the variant. Later on, in the modern time, the Chinese character system changed into traditional and simplified Chinese because each government in Asia wants a unified and standardized language. That's all. That's why Chinese was separated in two systems. Of course, I just briefly summarized the history. In reality, the situation is much complicated. In the end, does this unified movement succeed in Asia? Well,
yes and no.
In the official document in each government and the school textbook, it is basically done. But on the other side, there are both simplified and traditional Chinese in each society. Just like what I said before, it depends on how people understand the modernity and the tradition. So the common folk may take a different understanding compared to the government. Some people in Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan still uses the simplified Chinese in daily life, just like thousands of years ago. They know it is improper and only use it for convenience. And some people use the traditional Chinese in mainland China or Singapore or wherever. They use it in order to preserve the tradition. They consider it as the most important thing. And this language reform is closely related to government, so it is also very political. First, the thing is very complicated nowadays, and it confuses not only the foreigners but also the Chinese citizens. So, don't worry, you are not alone. Okay, that's all for today. I want to discuss more about the modernity, but I don't want to make this video too long. Maybe another day. If you are interested in this kind of history, please follow my channel and leave your comment below. It will mean a lot to me. So, see you next time. Bye 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 bye.